He was 3 weeks from bankruptcy. Tesla, SpaceX, both on the edge of collapse. Every dollar he had was gone. And he made a decision that most people would call insane. He borrowed $100 million more. Not to save himself, to double down, to go all in when every rational voice screamed retreat. And that decision made him the richest man on the planet. This is Elon Musk's story. But it's also Machiavelli's principle, the one they don't teach you, the one the system hides because if you understood it, you'd stop playing their game and start playing the real one. Debt isn't what they told you it is. It's not a trap. It's not evil. It's not something to avoid at all costs. Debt is leverage. And leverage, when wielded by someone who understands the calculus, is the fastest path from nothing to everything. Machiavelli wrote that the prince must know when to be bold and when to be cautious. But boldness, he said, requires resources. And if you wait to have those resources yourself, you'll wait forever while bolder men take everything with borrowed swords. The wealthy know this. That's why they carry massive debt while preaching savings to you. They borrow billions to build while you save thousands to survive. They use other people's money to multiply their power while you use your own pennies and stay small. Today, you're learning the truth about debt. Not the consumer debt that enslaves, the strategic debt that liberates, the Machiavellian calculus that separates those who build empires from those who watch from the sidelines. Because once you see how debt is really used, you can never unsee it, and you'll never be the same. You've been programmed to fear debt. From childhood you heard the warnings, stay out of debt, pay it off fast, live within your means, credit cards are dangerous, loans will ruin you, and if you listened, you did exactly what the system wanted. You stayed small, cautious, and controllable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. While you were avoiding debt, the wealthy were swimming in it. Billions of dollars borrowed, leverage to the absolute limit. And they weren't scared. They were strategic, because they know something you were never taught. Debt isn't good or bad, it's a tool. And like any tool, it's only as dangerous or powerful as the person wielding it. A knife in the hands of a child is a threat. In the hands of a surgeon, it saves lives. Debt works the same way. The poor borrow to consume, to buy things they can't afford. Cars, clothes, vacations. That debt enslaves them because it generates no return. It's pure loss disguised as lifestyle. The middle class borrows cautiously. A mortgage, maybe a business loan, but they're terrified the entire time, always trying to pay it off as fast as possible. They see debt as a burden to escape. But the wealthy? They see debt as fuel. They borrow not to consume, but to create, to scale, to multiply. They understand that if they can borrow money at 5% and deploy it at 20% return, they're not losing. They're printing wealth. And the bigger the debt, the faster the empire grows. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He watched kingdoms expand not through saving, but through leverage. Alliances, borrowed armies, strategic loans. The prince who hoarded gold stayed small. The prince who borrowed boldly and deployed wisely conquered nations. Elon Musk was facing total collapse in 2008. Tesla was burning cash. SpaceX had failed 3 launches. He was out of money, out of options, and instead of retreating, instead of playing it safe, he borrowed $100 million and bet it all on one more launch. One more production run, one more shot. That wasn't reckless. That was calculated. That was Machiavellian. Because he understood the math. He understood that the risk of doing nothing was greater than the risk of going all in. And that calculation, that willingness to weaponize debt when others would surrender, is why he won. Today you're learning that calculation. The 8 principles that turn debt from danger into domination. The first principle Machiavelli would teach you is this: strategic debt creates asymmetric risk. You risk little, you gain everything. Most people think debt is symmetrical. You borrow $100,000, you owe $100,000. If you fail, you lose it all. But that's not how the wealthy use it. They structure debt so the upside is unlimited and the downside is capped. Think about Elon's situation. He borrowed $100 million. If Tesla and SpaceX failed, he'd declare bankruptcy. He'd lose the borrowed money, yes, but his personal loss was capped. Bankruptcy laws protect you. The banks take the hit. Not your future earnings, not your ability to start again. But if he succeeded, the upside was infinite. Tesla is now worth $800 billion. SpaceX, $150 billion. That $100 million loan created nearly $1 trillion in value. That's not symmetrical, that's asymmetric. Machiavelli would call this the art of controlled risk. The prince who wages war with borrowed soldiers risks the soldiers, not his own life. If he wins, he takes the kingdom. If he loses, he retreats, and the lenders absorb the loss. That's not cowardice, that's strategy. The poor fear debt because they think it's symmetrical. Borrow $10,000, owe $10,000. But the wealthy structure it asymmetrically. They borrow $10 million, risk bankruptcy at worst, and capture billions at best. The math isn't even close. Here's the tactical truth. If you're using your own money, your growth is limited by your savings. But if you use other people's money strategically, your growth is limited only by opportunity. And opportunity is infinite. That's why the rich get richer. Not because they're smarter, because they understand asymmetry, and they weaponize it through debt. The second principle, debt eliminates retreat. And when retreat is impossible, victory becomes inevitable. Machiavelli called this necessita, necessity, the force that compels men to greatness when comfort would let them quit. And debt, strategic debt, creates that force artificially. When Elon borrowed $100 million with 3 weeks until bankruptcy, he didn't just get capital, he got commitment. He burned the ships. He removed the option of giving up, because now failure wasn't just disappointing, it was catastrophic. And that psychological shift changed everything. Most people fail not because they lack ability, but because they lack commitment. They have backup plans, safety nets, ways out. And the moment things get hard, they take the exit. They tell themselves they tried. But they didn't. They quit. Debt removes that option. When you owe $100 million and bankruptcy is 3 weeks away, you don't have the luxury of quitting. You find a way. You work 20-hour days. You make impossible decisions. You do whatever it takes. Not because you're brave, because you have no choice. That's the power of necessita. It focuses the mind. It eliminates distractions. It turns possibility into urgency. And urgency is the mother of execution. The wealthy understand this. That's why they borrow even when they don't need to. Not because they're reckless, because debt creates discipline. It forces efficiency. It makes you move faster, decide better, and execute harder than you ever would with your own comfortable savings. Here's the brutal truth. Comfort kills ambition. Safety breeds hesitation. But debt breeds hunger. And hunger builds empires. If you're not willing to put yourself in a position where failure hurts, you'll never push hard enough to win big. The third principle, debt buys time. And in the game of wealth, time is the only resource that matters. Most people think the slow path is safer. Save for 10 years, then start the business. Build gradually, avoid risk. But while you're saving, the market is moving. Competitors are launching, opportunities are closing, and by the time you're ready, the game is over. Machiavelli would tell you that the general who arrives first to the battlefield chooses the terrain. The general who arrives late fights on someone else's terms. Speed is advantage, and debt buys speed. When Elon borrowed $100 million, he didn't just get money, he got velocity. He could hire engineers immediately. Scale production now. Launch the rocket today. He compressed 10 years of slow growth into 2 years of explosive execution. That's not reckless, that's strategic time leverage. Think about real estate investors. They don't save for 20 years to buy one property with cash. They borrow, buy 10 properties now, and let tenants pay the debt. In 20 years, they own 10 properties. The cash buyer owns one, same time frame, 10 times the result. That's the power of debt as a speed multiplier. The wealthy understand that markets reward speed. The first mover captures the advantage. The late mover fights for scraps. And if you're waiting to self-fund, you're guaranteeing you'll be late. Here's the calculus. If you can borrow money and deploy it faster than the interest compounds, you win. You're not paying for debt, you're paying for speed. And speed in a competitive market is priceless. Debt isn't a burden when it accelerates your timeline. It's the most valuable purchase you'll ever make. The fourth principle, debt doesn't just give you capital, it multiplies your leverage exponentially. Leverage is doing more with less. But most people think leverage is limited by what they own. If you have $10,000, you can only leverage $10,000 worth of opportunity. But that's not how the wealthy operate. They use debt to stack leverage on leverage. They borrow $100,000, use it to secure a partnership worth $1 million, use that partnership to raise $10 million in funding, and deploy that $10 million to capture a $100 million market. Each layer multiplies the previous one. That's exponential leverage. Machiavelli saw this in warfare. A prince with 1,000 soldiers borrows 5,000 more. That borrowed army lets him conquer a city. That city provides resources to hire 10,000 more soldiers, and suddenly he's unstoppable. The initial debt didn't just add soldiers, it multiplied power. Elon's $100 million loan didn't just fund operations. It attracted investors who saw he was serious. It brought talent who believed the mission would survive. It created credibility that opened doors to partnerships, contracts, and influence worth billions. The debt was the match. The leverage was the explosion. Here's the framework. Debt is the entry ticket to opportunities you can't access with savings alone. A $100,000 loan doesn't just buy equipment. It buys credibility, velocity, and positioning. And those intangibles multiply into outcomes your $10,000 in savings could never touch. The wealthy use debt as a lever to move mountains. The poor see debt as a weight that crushes them. The difference isn't the debt. It's the understanding of how leverage compounds when you deploy it strategically. The fifth principle, debt reveals who you really are. And if you're weak, it destroys you. If you're strong, it makes you unstoppable. Machiavelli believed that adversity is the test of character. The prince who rules in peacetime is untested. But the prince who survives war, betrayal, and collapse, that's the one who earns the throne. Debt is that test. It exposes your discipline, your focus, your resilience. When Elon took on $100 million in debt with bankruptcy looming, most people would have crumbled. The pressure would have broken them. They would have made desperate decisions, blamed others, or given up entirely. But he didn't. He worked harder, thought clearer, executed faster. The debt didn't crush him, it sharpened him. That's the filter. Debt separates the pretenders from the builders. If you can't handle the pressure of owing money, you'll never handle the pressure of building an empire. Because empire building is pressure. Constant, relentless, suffocating pressure. And if you can't perform under that weight, you don't belong at the top. The wealthy use debt as a self-imposed trial. They borrow not because they need to, but because it keeps them sharp. It eliminates complacency. It forces them to perform. And performance under pressure is what creates legends. Here's the brutal honesty. If the idea of taking on strategic debt terrifies you, you're not ready for wealth. Because wealth requires risk. It requires pressure. It requires the ability to function when everything is on the line. Debt doesn't create weakness. It reveals it. And if you survive the test, you emerge stronger, faster, and more dangerous than you ever were before. The sixth principle, debt forces everyone around you to want you to succeed. When you're self-funded, you're alone. If you fail, only you lose. If you succeed, only you win. But when you borrow, you create a network of people invested in your victory. Banks, investors, partners, they all need you to win because your failure costs them. Machiavelli understood this in political alliances. The prince who fights alone can be abandoned. But the prince who owes debts to powerful allies? Those allies protect him, not out of kindness but out of self-interest. His survival is their profit. When Elon borrowed $100 million, he didn't just get money, he got allies. The lenders needed Tesla and SpaceX to succeed, so they provided advice, connections, and patience they wouldn't have offered otherwise. His debt made them partners in his survival. This is counterintuitive. Most people think debt makes you vulnerable, but strategic debt makes you supported. It turns creditors into collaborators. They don't want you to fail. They want you to win so they get paid. And that alignment of incentives creates a support structure self-funding never does. Think about venture capital. Investors don't just give money. They give networks, mentorship, credibility. Why? Because they're invested. Your success is their return. That's not charity. That's aligned incentives. Here's the tactical move. When you take on strategic debt, you're not just borrowing capital. You're recruiting allies who have a financial reason to help you win. That invisible army is worth more than the money itself. Debt, used correctly, doesn't isolate you. It surrounds you with people who need you to succeed. And that's a force multiplier most will never understand. The seventh principle, debt imposes external discipline that self-funding never does. When you're using your own money, you can be lazy, you can delay, you can make excuses. If things don't work, you just stop and walk away. No consequences, no accountability, just quiet failure. But when you owe $100 million, you can't be lazy, you can't delay, you can't make excuses, because the debt doesn't care about your feelings. It comes due whether you're ready or not. And that external pressure forces discipline that internal motivation rarely matches. Machiavelli observed that rulers with external threats governed better than those in peacetime. The threat forced focus. It eliminated waste. It demanded results. Debt works the same way. It's an external threat that sharpens your execution. Elon couldn't afford to waste time in 2008. Every decision mattered. Every dollar had to count. Every day brought him closer to either victory or total collapse. That clarity, that urgency, that accountability, those are the hidden benefits of debt. The wealthy understand this. They borrow to create artificial deadlines, to force themselves to perform, to eliminate the comfort that breeds mediocrity. Debt is a forcing function. It makes you better because it has to. Here's the framework. Debt is like a personal trainer for your business. It pushes you harder than you'd push yourself. It holds you accountable when motivation fades. It demands results when you'd otherwise coast. Without debt, you're accountable only to yourself. And most people are soft on themselves. But with debt, you're accountable to reality. And reality doesn't negotiate, it just demands. And that demand makes you unstoppable. The eighth and final principle, debt can be restructured, forgiven, or erased. But opportunity missed is gone forever. This is the calculation most people get backwards. They fear debt because they think it's permanent. But bankruptcy laws exist. Debt can be negotiated, interest can be refinanced. In the worst case, you declare bankruptcy, reset, and start again. Debt is temporary. But opportunity? Opportunity has an expiration date. The market window that's open today closes tomorrow. The partnership available now vanishes next month. The competitive advantage you could seize today gets taken by someone faster next week. Machiavelli would say that the prince who hesitates to borrow loses the kingdom to the prince who acts. Because kingdoms don't wait, opportunities don't pause, and by the time you've saved enough to move, the throne is occupied. Elon's decision to borrow $100 million wasn't about the debt. It was about the opportunity. If he waited, Tesla would have died. SpaceX would have collapsed. The electric vehicle revolution would have been led by someone else. The debt was temporary. The opportunity was once in a generation. Here's the brutal math. The cost of bad debt is capped. Bankruptcy is the floor. But the cost of missed opportunity is infinite. You'll never know what you could have built. You'll spend your life wondering what if, while someone bolder lives your dream. The wealthy understand this viscerally. They'd rather take on debt and risk failure than avoid debt and guarantee mediocrity. Because failure with debt can be recovered. But time wasted being cautious can never be reclaimed. Debt is a choice. Missed opportunity is a tragedy. Choose wisely. Now you understand the 8 principles of Machiavelli's debt calculus, the framework that turned Elon's $100 million gamble into a $1 trillion empire. The same framework Bezos used to build Amazon. The same principles every titan of industry has wielded while teaching you to fear what they exploit. So the question isn't whether debt is dangerous. The question is, are you capable of wielding it strategically? Because here's the truth. Not everyone should take on debt. If you're undisciplined, it will destroy you. If you're reckless, it will bury you. If you can't handle pressure, it will break you. Debt is a weapon, and weapons in weak hands are suicide. But if you're strategic, if you understand asymmetry, if you can handle pressure and execute under fire, then debt isn't danger. It's your fastest path to empire. Here's your decision point. You can keep playing it safe. Keep saving slowly. Keep waiting for perfect conditions. And you'll get the same results you've always gotten. Slow, small, safe. Or you can embrace the Machiavellian calculus, study the framework, identify the strategic opportunity, structure the debt intelligently, and deploy it with precision. Elon was 3 weeks from bankruptcy, and he borrowed $100 million more. Not because he was crazy, because he understood the math, and that calculation made him the richest man alive. The formula is there. The principles are clear. The only question left is whether you have the courage to use them. Debt isn't good or evil. It's a tool. And now you understand how the most powerful people on earth wield it. If this changed how you see money, hit that like button. Subscribe for more Machiavellian strategies they don't want you to know. Share this with someone still afraid of the weapon the wealthy use daily. Comment below. Does Elon's $100 million gamble make sense now? And what strategic opportunity are you hesitating on because you're afraid to leverage? Remember, the poor fear debt. The middle class avoids it. The wealthy weaponize it. Which one will you be? The choice is yours. But choose fast, because opportunity doesn't wait.